Yes, more Remington 870 components. Today we have the Breech-Bolt and slide assembly. I never understood why they call it a slide assembly. It's one component. It's one machined component. And the time that it took to manufacture this part, and then they blued it. Notice the short ledge here. So this is the earliest slide assembly I've seen. I've had two early 870s apart, serial number 8457V and 16019V, which I believe are both first year productions from 1950, and they both had this style with that short ledge, and they both had this same bolt as well with this locking block. So this is the only version of the 870 bolt I've seen that has a locking block that isn't retained within the bolt. Not to mention the finish here as well. I can't tell if this is chrome, brushed chrome, or if it's just bare steel. But both of those early 1950s 870s both had this combination of breech bolt and slide assembly with the free floating locking block. So these go together like this. And when it's in battery, when you got the action in battery, the locking block is forced upward by that surface right there, and it locks into the receiver. And then after you pull the trigger, get a detonation, and you start to pump the action to the rear, that locking block has the opportunity to drop right out of the way. And so this is what that looks like. It's really a neat action. So here's the second variation of slide assembly, and it has a much longer, that's the only difference here is the length of that ledge. I think what's going on here is it made a more stable platform for the locking block when you're out of battery, and then when you're in battery it has no effect. I thought it had something to do with how these land, but it really doesn't. I think it has more to do with how the locking block is resting on it when it's out of battery. I am not a Remington expert. I didn't work for the Remington factory. If you know more about this subject, please put it in the comments below. I'd like to hear more, and I'm sure everyone watching would like to hear more as well. Here's our third variation of locking block, and again, the only difference is the finish. They just omitted the finish. They realized that by bluing a part that's inside the gun, it was really redundant. You know, the bluing finish isn't really doing anything to protect the surface of the steel. It's just a blackening process is all. Really what's protecting the quality of this, the integrity of this part, and along with the bolt as well, is the heat treatment. Notice right here You can see two of them. There's one over here and one over here. Those are hardness test indicators, and you see that on both the second and third variation of the slide assembly. But you don't see that on the first variation. And maybe we just got lucky, but every time I've seen it, they're always here on the top. Here's the next variation of the bolt, the Breech-Bolt and locking block. Now that the locking block is retained, they drilled they machined a hole or a slot in the side of the bolt, and then they drilled a hole in the side of the locking block and placed a roll pin there. And now the only way that this locking block will come out is when you remove the firing pin. You got to drive out this pin, and then the firing pin and spring will come out the rear, and then the locking block can drop out the bottom. Now the only other difference here, other than retaining the locking block, is the finish. I can't tell if this is just bare steel or if it's a brushed hard chrome. I have to assume it's brushed hard chrome. Here's the fourth variation of the locking block. And the first thing that's quite obvious is this huge cutout. You see that? So when the locking block is engaging, so the only thing I can assume that's for is for weight reduction. Remington was manufacturing a lightweight model, and really that was just including the lightweight profile of the barrel mostly, but they could have included this as well, recognizing that that little bit of weight adds up. But then the other obvious difference is how this slide assembly is manufactured. This one is two components that come together, and they're stamped, or at least the bottom is a stamped component. And then here's the third variation of the Breech-Bolt. If you'll notice, the finish is a lot nicer. Now that's could just be because of use, but it appears that this finish has a more bluish tint to it. Maybe this one is just heavily used, but it appears as if maybe the finish, the hard chrome finish, is a different process or a different chemical process. I really don't know. But the other major difference here really is this cutout. They decided that they didn't need to machine it as heavily as they were, and so they changed that manufacturing process. And then of course the firing pin is a lot shorter. But other than that, they're exactly the same. And then here's the next variation of the slide assembly. Again, it's a stamped part, and they used two roll pins. That's probably really hard to see on this side. But they used two, not roll pins, but just regular solid pins, and swedged them in with a machine, probably a press, and then ground over the bottom surface to make it really smooth. Here's the next variation on the bolt. And again, although this has a lot more use, and you can see that on the surface of the bolt, the wear, it appears that it has the same bluish tint. So I don't know that this is about wear or not. I think this is a different chemical process, but I really don't know. But the difference here and what makes this a different variation is this cutout. They decided to remove some material from the bottom of the bolt, and I can only assume that's to clearance something in the trigger assembly. Here's the next slide assembly. And the only difference here is this little, they cut that edge heavily so that it would clearance the receiver. Of course, that's the rear of the locking block, so as you're pumping the action back into, if you're opening the breech bolt, then this is meant to clearance something inside the receiver, how this is engaging the wall, the inside wall of the receiver. But they only did it on one side, and the next variation of the slide assembly, they put it on both sides. Why you wouldn't just put it on both sides to begin with. And then the next variation on the bolt is just a finish difference. Mechanically, it's all the same. It's just a different finish now. They have a blued version. This is a polished blued version. Here's a nickeled version for the mariner. And notice on the back here, they're marking it M. You don't see that marking on earlier versions of the bolt. And I can only assume that means Magnum. But I don't know, because this is not a 3.5-inch Magnum bolt. This is a 2 3/4 and 3-inch bolt. So maybe that's just distinguishing the difference between a, I don't know. I mean, that's curious why they would bother to mark M on the back of a standard bolt when none of the earlier bolts have that marking. And then here's the last variation on the bolt, which has that same stippling pattern but no M. And it's just a B blasted and blued finish. Now this one also has the MIM'd extractor. Everything else is the same. And then this is the last variation on the slide assembly. And you're asking yourself, what is different about this? Well, it's that little notch right there. Now, I don't know why they bothered to do this, but I only find this slide assembly in left-handed 870s. So of course your charging bars, which attach to this, your slide assembly rests on the bars, and these two little notches rest on the bars. Which would be like this if you're pumping it to the rear. But they put this little extra notch in there on the charging bar so that this will not fit. This will certainly fit on a right-handed model, a standard model, but it will only fit on a left-handed model. So I actually had a left-handed model 870 once, and I didn't have this proper component. So I took a standard slide assembly and notched it out, and it worked fine. Of course, the bolt is proprietary to the left hand, and the charging bars are proprietary. The receiver's proprietary. Why they chose to make the slide assembly proprietary, I don't know. Maybe they figured everything else is going to be proprietary. They might as well make this proprietary. But if there's another component you'd like to hear about, please put it in the comments below and we'll talk more about it. Thanks for watching, people. Make it a great day.